part 2 of how to travel Southeast Asia. My name is Bailey and I'm a travel content creator, mainly on TikTok and Instagram, but also here on YouTube. I started traveling the world in 2022 when I graduated college and have pretty much been going non-stop since. I have a remote job. I started solo and I still do a good bit of solo trips here and there, but I also have a group of friends that I do travel with most of the time. And I just talk about all things travel and life in our 20s and how to make this travel lifestyle a reality for you. If any of that sounds more interesting and you want more day-to-day content on my life and my travels, make sure you check out my Instagram and my TikTok, but more informational content, that's right here. So let's get started with the video. In this video, I'm going to be going over all things how to make friends, safety, travel credit cards, what solo travel looks like in Southeast Asia, phone plans, what I wish I knew before my trip, and also just talking about my experience and some of my highlights from the trip. I went traveling around Southeast Asia for 3 months, September, October, and November of this past year. And I mainly focused on 3 countries. I was in Vietnam, the Philippines, and Indonesia. So a lot of my knowledge is just based on those 3 countries. But the cool thing about Southeast Asia is the whole region of the world is pretty similar. So if you've done one, a lot of things are going to translate to the other places. So you can still use this as a guide even if you're just going to one or none of those places. Now, I did this trip in 2 parts. I had the first month and a half where I was completely solo on the trip, and then the second month and a half where 3 of my good friends from the US came and met me, and we ended up doing the rest of the trip together. And they were 2 very different experiences, and I loved both of them equally. As someone that is 24, I didn't feel as out of place in Southeast Asia as I thought I was going to. I feel like a lot of people in the backpacking world or the travel world talk about Southeast Asia as being a lot younger of a demographic. A lot of kids that are 18, fresh out of high school or fresh out of college, and I didn't find that to be the case, and that may be because I do travel in a slightly more elevated lifestyle because I do have a full-time job, but it really wasn't that bad. I felt like most people I was meeting were around my age or maybe even a little bit older. Whenever I'm solo traveling, and especially in Southeast Asia because hotels are so inexpensive compared to the US and other traveling places, when I'm solo, I'll usually do a 50-50 split of hotels and hostels. Because I do work remote, whenever I'm working from home on those 4 days of the week, I definitely try and have a more private accommodation. But then on the weekends, I do like to stay in bunk rooms sometimes just to be able to meet people. Because it definitely can be hard when you isolate yourself in a separate hotel. So staying at hostels is where you're gonna meet the most people. And if you're not staying in a hostel, you should join the tours that the hostels have, or just join tours in general. I ended up meeting this other girl from a different hostel, and we ended up being in the same group for this food tour in Vietnam, and we became friends that way. And then you also just meet other people by joining the bar crawls that they have at night, or even just hanging out in the lobby. It's just making yourself feel approachable. I am not the most extroverted person. I usually don't go up to people first. It's just something that makes me a little self-conscious and nervous about. So if you're not super extroverted, please do not fear. As long as you're putting the energy out there that you want to talk to people and you want to meet people, it will happen. I also find it a lot easier when I do initiate those conversations to be initiating them in the bunk rooms, because the second you walk in, you can see someone and just start a conversation that way, and then maybe they'll invite you to do something later. And it's a lot easier and less intimidating than it seems, at least for me, when it's one-on-one in those more so casual interactions than just having to walk up to someone point blank in the street and start talking to them. I did find solo travel in Vietnam to be extremely social. I feel like there was always someone that I could turn to have something to do with, and we ended up forming these kind of friend groups while we were there, because a lot of people are going to be backpacking for a long time that are going to Southeast Asia because it is on the opposite side of the world. So there were a lot of people that I ended up hanging out with for like a whole week at a time, and we would randomly do stuff throughout the week. This is just your sign to not be scared to solo travel, because there will always be people there that you can meet and become friends with. Now, the other half of my trip when my friends were there, that's a completely different experience, because we were hanging out in hotels pretty much the whole time. We were really this like secluded entity, and the only time we met people is really when we were going out, which wasn't all that often. We were having definitely more of a wellness trip when we were there. And so do not be put off by people saying that Southeast Asia is only a party vibe, because you can definitely do both or none. There are also plenty of apps that you can use to make friends if you're not going with a group of people, and my favorite one is Going Solo. It is the easiest app. It's kind of like a Hinge for travel friends, and you can join group chats of people that are in certain areas and kind of talk about what dates you're going to be there, and you can go ahead and already make these connections before you're even there or right as you arrive. It was also really funny because a lot of people are on similar routes. Like, there's certain places that you know to go next, and so there was a bunch of times where I would meet people in a different country even like weeks later that I had met prior. So it's really funny when you get in those situations how small the world is, and especially how small the travel community is. When it comes to just safety as a solo traveler or just safety in general in Southeast Asia, be very mindful of your surroundings. I mean, think of it as if you were at home, you just want to be aware, you want to be mindful. However, heavy disclaimers on this is like, don't turn your mind off and don't think you're completely fine, because especially as women, we're never 100% fine anywhere. But Southeast Asia is one of the places where I felt the most safe as a solo female traveler, and I have solo traveled to, I think now, like 12 different countries. So I felt extremely comfortable in Southeast Asia, even walking alone at night sometimes. But once again, use your best judgment. Always have your stuff on you. Watch out for pickpocketers, especially when you're in more busy places like Bali. People will snatch your phone out of your hand. People will pickpocket you. That's a part of traveling. That's a part of being a tourist. Airport to where I'm going when I arrive. It's just the last thing I want to think about. So having that scheduled prior makes all the difference, that you're not questioning anything. When you're traveling anywhere, but also in Southeast Asia, you have to think about your phone plan, and the two easiest ways to do it. First one is to call your phone provider that you currently have and see what travel plan options they have. A lot of times it's like $10 a day for 10 days, so it maxes out of $100, but that's on top of your existing plan. So you'll need to budget that into your situation, but a lot of times it's for like 10 gigabytes of data for the month. Your other option is to get an eSIM. So this would be downloading an app straight to your iPhone. You can use ones like Holofly or Airlo in order to get service directly on your phone, and you just buy the exact plan you want. So you can say, I want 5 gigs for 30 days, or pick and choose. That will be your cheaper option, but sometimes I find it easier just to pay the extra price and just be able to talk directly to my provider. I wanted to go ahead and shout out the sponsor of today's video, which is Tortuga Backpacks, and they are your first stop for any sort of quality backpack or travel accessories that you need for your trip. Your first step when packing for Southeast Asia is to acquire their 40-liter travel backpack light. This is going to fit everything you need for your trip, and I'm going to show you how.
The first thing I look for in a travel backpack is something that opens up like a suitcase. It just makes it so much easier to see everything you packed and not have to take everything out when you need to grab something. I can fit 2 packing cubes of clothes in here along with shoes to travel comfortably for 3 months. The mesh pockets on the side are perfect for organizing your smaller items, and it even has a hidden laptop sleeve. It is so important to look for something with thick padding and proper hip support. This is where so many people go wrong when choosing a backpack. This bag is considered a carry-on and is perfect to fit in the small overhead bin space in Asia. If you're interested in more of Tortuga Backpacks products, check out the link in my description for 10% off your first order.
I seriously cannot talk enough about how much I love this bag. And in Southeast Asia, traveling with a backpack over a suitcase is just a must. Now for the clothing that goes actually in the backpack, here's my packing list. I'm going to put this here so that you can screenshot it and get a starting point for when you're planning for your trip. And this is what I packed for 3 months. You don't need as much as you think. That travel backpack wasn't even completely full because I knew I was going to be buying things and wanting to bring things home when I was there. And so less is more. You'll end up wearing the same things every single day. Just make sure you pack for the weather. I was there in rainy season, so I made sure I had a rain jacket with me. I didn't bring a whole lot of white. I brought more white than most people do, but don't bring a ton of it. You want to make sure a lot of your clothes you can get rough and dirty with, because it's not a clean area of the world to be in. There's a lot of just dust and dirt, and you're on the back of motorbikes or bicycles or just in tuk-tuks and sweating a lot because it's really hot. So just keep that in mind. You want a lot of linens and a lot of clothes that are really easy to wash. When it comes to cards that you're going to want while traveling, you're going to want to bring a debit card. You're going to want to bring a travel credit card. I recommend the Chase Sapphire. That is the one that I have and that I have used for almost 3 years now. It's the best way to get extra points. I think everything on travel is like 3 to 5 times the amount of points that you need, and you can also use the points that you acquire for flights. And you don't have foreign transaction fees, which is just the most important part. And then you're going to need a backup credit card just in case anything happens to the first one. The debit card is necessary for pulling money out of ATMs, which will happen often because cash is pretty much king in Southeast Asia, but the credit cards are also important when you're in other areas or paying for maybe a hotel stay, or when you're in more populated areas like Bali where you can use credit cards pretty freely. The biggest thing to look for in a travel credit card is just to make sure that there are 0 foreign transaction fees. Now for the things that I wish I knew before my trip, the biggest one that comes to mind is literally do not plan anything in advance. Like, at all. Everything in life in general is so unpredictable on that side of the world that you don't want to be too far ahead of yourself, because you may end up with food poisoning and have to stay somewhere an extra night. You might not make your flight, or your flight might be canceled because of weather, or any of these variety of like things could happen, and probably will happen. The longer that you're there, the more things will disrupt your plans. In Southeast Asia, weather and plane issues. We had to take a bunch of ferries that were a little scary just because of also weather. It's just very unreliable. Buses will just stop on the side of the road for 3 hours for no reason and not tell you what's going on. You just have to learn to go with the flow. The apps that you absolutely have to have on your phone are Google Maps, because Apple Maps anywhere but the US pretty much just is not reliable. 12 Go Asia, which is how you're gonna book a lot of your transportation besides flights. Airbnb if you're with a group or just wanting to splurge a little bit. Google Translate to communicate with local people. A lot of menus will be in English, but if you're trying to eat more authentic or just communicate with the local population, having Google Translate doesn't hurt. And lastly, Grab. Grab is like their form of Uber, and it's what you're going to use to book all your private rides, maybe to the airport if you have a ton of luggage, or even just motorbikes to get around day to day. Another really random one that we dealt with on our trip is be mindful of lice. If you are taking Grabs, I recommend that you wear the helmet that they give you, because getting on the back of a motorcycle without wearing a helmet is really scary. We did have one of our friends get into a motorcycle wreck while we were there. Thankfully, she's okay. It was just a minor concussion. It could have been a lot worse if she wasn't wearing a helmet. Just remember that there are like tens to hundreds of people wearing that same helmet each day, and lice is just a very real possibility. So just make sure you're checking your head a little bit often. If you start feeling a little itchy, see what's up maybe. One of our friends in our group ended up getting it, and we spent the last like 2 weeks of our trip combing out her hair every single night. I felt so bad for her. And lastly, I want to just remind you to move slowly. Whatever that means to you. Maybe to you, move slowly means spend 3 days in a place. Maybe it means spend a month in a place or a week. Just move slower than you think you do. You want to make sure you have enough time to enjoy the experience and you're not just checking off countries or checking off cities. Actually be mindful of your time and enjoy, and don't feel like you're in a rush. That is probably my biggest travel advice that I've learned in the past 3 years, is just move slower than you think you need to. Especially if you were gone for long periods of time, like multiple months. Lastly, I want to talk about some of my favorite experiences that I had when I was in Southeast Asia. For my first month in the Philippines, I was on a really small island called Catanduanes, and I was surfing pretty much every day, if not twice a day, because I was staying at an all-girls surf camp. The surf camp I was at was Mangada Experience, and she has all different surf camps all over the Philippines, so I definitely recommend checking that out. If you're looking for a more guided experience, we would go hike waterfalls, we would surf each day, do other types of hiking and different activities, and I also got to meet like 20 other people that were traveling solo, and then from there, people would go off in different groups after the trip and start traveling Southeast Asia together. It's definitely a great way to kick off your trip, to be able to meet certain people that you could then potentially travel with after. The next is that if you're going to Vietnam, you have to do the Ha Giang Loop. It is like my #1 thing that you have to do when you're there. This is a motorcycle tour through northern Vietnam. You can have an Easy Rider, which is a Vietnamese local who is sitting in front of you, you're on the back of the bike, and they are driving you throughout the whole trip. It's a 3 to 4 day journey depending on what you choose, but I recommend the 4-day one. And you basically just ride all day. Half the time I didn't even have headphones in. I just enjoyed the experience and being extremely present. And you stop off and you do hikes, or you explore local experiences, or you go swim in waterfalls, and you're staying at these really cool local guest houses every single night. It's a really unique experience and worth every cent, and honestly was probably the highlight of my trip. The next is when I was in Bali, and when I'm going to these super touristic places, I love to find the local things to support the local people, and this is My Organic Farm. We went and we did a cultural experience with them where we got to make some of their traditional offerings, and then then they also went back to the farm. We got to pick our vegetables and the fruits and everything that we were going to use for the meal, and they cooked us a very traditional Balinese meal. We were able to help them throughout the whole process. It was almost like a half-day thing. We went for the whole morning into the afternoon and just got to hang out with local people, really learn about their culture and their food, and it was honestly a really beautiful day. Next is a boat tour through the Komodo Islands. This can also be 2 nights or 3 nights, and this is where you live on a live-aboard boat and you get to island hop through all the islands in the Komodos, see the Komodo dragons, go on really beautiful hikes, live on a boat, go snorkeling with manta rays. It was such a cool experience that you definitely have to do, and to see lesser known places in Indonesia. Along with that, we also went to Sumbawa, which is a beautiful, beautiful place that is pretty much untouched by tourism still. So I definitely recommend branching out from the normal touristy spots and exploring these other islands. And lastly, you have to swim with manta rays. If you do not want to go out and explore to other islands, or you just don't have time on your trip, definitely head over to Nusa Penida, because that is where you can snorkel with manta rays if you get really, really lucky. We were lucky enough to get one, and it was at the very end of this one location that we were snorkeling at, and me and my 3 friends were the only people still in the water when this happened, and the manta ray swam right under us, and he was massive, and we were able to like swim down and swim with him. It was truly magical, and it was all I could have wanted, and it felt like such a personal experience with nature. Can't recommend it enough if you get the chance to. That is all I have for this video. Southeast Asia is such an incredible place in the world that I feel like I have only scratched the surface of it. If you have any other questions about Southeast Asia, please leave them below and I will get back to you and answer all of your questions. It's an area of the world that I had to do so much research on, and so I just want to help you make your trip go as smooth as possible. If you want to see more of my content, make sure you check the links in my description box below and follow me on Instagram and TikTok. But if not, subscribe here, and I'll see you in my next video.